Behold, one and all, for I, like Cassandra of old, have become a prophet, doomed to scream from the mountaintops prophecies that shall be unheeded by the masses, not of war or suffering, but of tests run on computers that were never meant to be used in the way that the tests push them to, and then thermal throttle them so that YouTubers can gain views and subscribers, only for people to continue to buy the computers because it's not actually what they'll use them for. So today, I'm going to talk about the MacBook Air and why people running Cinebench really should consider the people who are actually going to buy these computers. So let's get started. So yeah, I figured that would be a good attention grabber to be a little dramatic at the start, but when the MacBook Pro came out a couple weeks ago, I made an entire video talking about how the M2 is thermal throttling in these computers, but only under extreme use cases. And generally, the takeaway that I tried to get across in that video was that you should buy a computer for what you need. Just pick what you think will fit you best for the longest period of time. And I mean, I'm basically going to reiterate, but I figured I'd make a video because, well, the MacBook Air's out and nobody listens. To some degree, I feel like they and me, myself, it's our fault that this precedent has been set. And that's not just those two specifically and me, but a lot of people in this sort of Apple following tech space, because especially now, but previously with the M1 Macs, when those came out, myself included, we were all floored by the performance we were getting out of these machines in such a small package, whether it be the older fanless MacBook Air, the active cooling MacBook Pro, or my daily driver for an entire year, the M1 Mac Mini. But that was mainly because they were better than the Intel computers, just because the Intel computers would ramp up and then thermal throttle to hell, and these didn't. But even then, they weren't really meant for the tasks, especially for me, that I was using them for, which was video editing. So now that the M2's out, people have this precedent in mind, and I kind of feel like it's my fault in a way, and a lot of people's faults for this precedent. Okay, let me just stop here for a minute and get myself on a track where I know that I can kind of get my point across to you all. And to start with, if I see Cinebench run one more time, I am going to scream. No! Stop it! Don't! God, no, I don't want to see it anymore. I got to admit, I used Cinebench a lot back in the day when I was really into building PCs and overclocking, and I used it not to see the performance figures, though it was kind of cool to see like the improvements per overclock bump that I did, but I mainly used it to test the stability of my computer. I would run it on a loop, make sure everything was stable, and then I would do something that I knew was a stressful task, but that had real-world implications, especially when I was doing things like gaming. You could see frame rate improvements, or when I used to have After Effects on my PC, you could see render time improvements. Cinebench literally just stood for me as a means of seeing improvements in context to your previous scores, barely, and seeing the stability, because it allowed for a 10-minute loop, which honestly, if you're doing an overclock and it's not stable enough for 10 minutes, you're probably going to want to go and fix that. The problem I take now with Cinebench is that a lot of YouTubers are using this tool, which runs a 10-minute loop of heavy CPU stress work, to push these computers, I'm not even going to say to their limit, beyond their limit, because let me just be completely blunt. You look at this razor-thin, fanless computer, and your first thought is, yeah, this is designed for prolonged renders. No, like, I don't look at my iPad Pro and say, I'm going to try to render a full 3D model with this thing and press it out to a visual effects tool and composite it. I'm not doing, if I need that, I'm going to get something with the word Pro in the name that's actually a Pro machine, because I do my research and I know that a fan in a MacBook Pro that's been around since 2016, I think was when that design was launched. Yeah, I think it was 2016. I'm not going to grab a 2016 design machine with the word Pro in it. I'm going to do my research, look at the MacBook Pros, see that they are thermally incredible when it comes to the M1 Pro and M1 Max, and buy one of those if I need a laptop. Or, even better, I'll buy a Mac Studio, and that has so much cooling for both the Ultra and the Max.
And I did buy one of those, and that's what I use. I don't use my M1 iPad Pro as an editing machine for anything more than pulling footage off my iPhone to do work. And it's got a media encoder, so that kind of stuff works. I'm getting on a rant again because this stuff just pisses me off. Cinebench, I hate it. Honestly, I really do. Because yes, I know it's based on Cinema 4D, which is a render engine tool for After Effects and a few other tools, but just putting a 3D model or a 3D render layout up and looping it 10 times is in no way a representative figure for how people are going to experience the MacBook Air. You could have an argument that that's how people may actually use the Mac Studio or the real MacBook Pros, or hell, especially the Mac Pro. But on a fanless, razor-thin, 18-hour battery life machine that is designed for college students with a lot of money, or for people who just need a laptop and don't want to use an iPad for their on-the-go tasks. No! After Cinebench, the second thing I want to say is that I understand that these YouTubers do say in their videos, especially the more recent ones, that these tests that they're running are not representative of real-world use.
Obviously, I don't think that's a realistic scenario.
But they don't say that until generally the 7 to 9 minute point into the video, at which point everybody who's really into tech is already watching to that point and know that that's really not something they got to worry about. But then the people who might watch it because they are considering buying one of these and are bombarded with news of thermal throttling, and they see a thumbnail saying that the MacBook Air thermal throttles like nobody's business, they're going to see the first few minutes of this. And because most of them are just shopping around and using videos to see what they want to purchase, they're going to see the first 5 minutes and go, Jesus Christ, this thing is terrible. I'm not going to buy that. When in reality, most people are going to use these for burst loads. They're not going to use it for prolonged tasks, which every M chip excels at thanks to the efficiency cores. I mentioned in my previous video how a lot of people who I used to work with when I was in sales at Best Buy were selling Intel Macs, basically a dead-end platform for Apple, over the M1 chips when they first came out, because people on YouTube were talking about how apps weren't fully optimized. So if you wanted to get optimized apps, you would want to go with Intel, but didn't pay attention to the fact that you had things like Rosetta, which were performing as good or better, which meant that when things were fully optimized, they were actually way better than the Intel version of that app. They didn't pay attention to that because you had to watch for a long period of time into a video to get that information. Now imagine that same thing happening with these thermal figures. Yes, Apple doesn't cool these computers efficiently enough to actually have them work for a prolonged period of time on a heavy workload. I'm not going to deny that. And for the people who do buy these computers and say, well, they thermal throttle because I am blasting these 24/7 with full 3D workloads and it just thermal throttles and everything slows down and it's hot to the touch and the battery dies and I'm having all these issues. You didn't buy the right computer. That's not really a hot take. I thought a lot about saying this beforehand, and in my experience, if you have a wide range of machines available to you from the M1 MacBook Air, the old design, the M2 MacBook Pro, the M2 MacBook Air, the M1 Pro and Max MacBook Pros, the M1 iMac, the M1 Mac Mini, and the M1 Max and M1 Ultra Mac Studio. You have a wide range of things available to you, and if you know your workload is going to be on an extreme long-term rendering basis, like that's just going to be your workflow, period, and you decide to go with a fanless MacBook Air and then complain about the thermals, I'm sorry, you bought the wrong one. If you had these issues with the M1, not so much your fault because it was the only Apple Silicon chip out at the time. Now that's not an excuse. I keep ranting at the end of these segments. Point is, for my second point, people aren't going to watch videos long enough to understand or to hear these YouTubers say, yeah, this isn't the real world case. Especially with Luke Miani going up on the roof of his apartment complex in like 90-degree weather in the sun and letting the thing bake with Cinebench. Like, obviously that's not a real world scenario, but a lot of people who are just browsing for products aren't actually going to get that far in the video. They're just going to see the thumbnail, watch the initial few minutes, and leave. I know that because that's how my metrics work too. So my third point isn't so much a rant or a complaint, it's a solution. And my solution to this is to kind of take an iJustine or an MKBHD approach, which they are longtime YouTubers and they have a lot more sort of stability when it comes to subscribers than some of these other channels, including myself. So I understand that throwing up a thumbnail with fire on the MacBook Air and talking about thermal throttling really drags in views. I get it. And I would do the same, except I would rather bitch about you all not giving these computers a fair shake and hurting sales of these computers, when in reality they are fantastic. I was out in Gaithersburg, I just bought a car, which was super stressful, and I stopped over at the Apple store and played around with the MacBook Air, and for the use case that I would have had it for, which is basically what I use my iPad Pro for, the thing is fantastic. And I'm getting off topic again. I do that a lot. Anyway, my solution that I'm sure nobody who's currently making these videos is actually going to take is, like I said, take an iJustine or an MKBHD approach, which is to evaluate the computer as to what it's intended and mention the performance, talk about the performance. I mean, hell, the performance on these things for web browsing, opening every app at once, even light video work through an optimized program like iMovie where you're cutting together iPhone videos or even some like basic 4K videos. The thing is fantastic. Like, you can talk about performance. I have no problem with people actually taking these things on the road and using them for photo editing or small video use, web browsing, college paperwork. Like, I love videos where people talk about using an iPad Pro as their college laptop because they give it a real evaluation of its strengths and its weaknesses. They don't sit with their iPad Pro running freaking loops of stress tests and then complain that it runs slow and gets hot and the battery dies. Every single machine, every single thing ever made has a task that it is good at and a group of tasks, in a lot of cases with computers, that they are good at. And then they have things that they were never engineered to do. If you are buying a trailer, you're going to want to get a truck to tow it. You're not going to buy a freaking Fiat 500 to try to tow a trailer. And if you do, you bought the wrong car, because there's a lot of options available that all do different things, and you can research what does what. If you buy a MacBook Air to do 3D rendering and you watch videos of people buying these computers to blast them with stress tests, and then you buy one and say, oh, it's slow, the battery dies, and it's hot, you bought the wrong machine. I had to get this video off my chest. I am done bitching about these computers. I think personally the MacBook Air with the M2 chip is fantastic. I love the design. I love the fact that it has MagSafe on it, so you can use both of your Thunderbolt ports while actually charging it. The display, I love Apple displays to begin with, and when I got to play around with one at the Apple store out in Gaithersburg, or I guess it was technically more like Rockville, but either way, when I got to play around with one, it always blows my mind how even like evenly lit, not individually micro LED lit panels still look amazing on Apple stuff. Like, their color calibration, even on like just edge lit displays, is insane. And if you're gonna buy one and you know that your use case is basically that of an iPad, maybe a little more than what an iPad can do, and you need macOS, they are fantastic. College computers, photo editing computers, they're fantastic for photo editing. Every MacBook Air I've ever used has been solid for photo editing. I'm not going to say fantastic because they weren't made for heavy 20,000 layer Photoshop projects, but for touching up stuff in Lightroom or completing a class in college where you're doing photo editing, amazing. Especially with those color accurate displays, which when I was using MacBook Airs back in the day, they were not as color accurate. So now it's even better. Like I just said, I'm done complaining. This is my last video talking about these computers, because nobody's going to listen. Like the title said, nobody listens to me about these things. So what do I care? If you know what you're going to be using your computer for, like I said in the last video where I talked about this, buy the computer that fits your needs. And if you want to buy a computer to complain about, go ahead and buy a freaking fanless MacBook Air and crank out 8K footage for hours on end and complain about how slow it is. That's entirely up to you. But at the end of the day, do your research, be smart with your purchases, get what you need for now and the future, And don't buy something based on a video where somebody blasts it with stress tests for 8 of the 15 minutes of the video, only to a little bit later talk about how it's actually not how people will normally use the machine. Either way, that's it. I'm sorry I went a little nuts in this video. It's just, as a previous salesperson, I know how people usually research these things, and then as somebody who is the family tech person, I have to be the one to correct them, and when they watch videos like this, it is just even harder to convince them that the stuff that people do in these videos isn't actually how these computers get used. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I got some more stuff coming up. I'm doing a full desk revamp. I got a dock review coming out. I've got a desk light. I got a bunch of things that I'm going to be reviewing and trying out. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think. I'm sure a lot of you are just going to be like, Garrett lost his mind in this video, which kind of right. But either way, comments are appreciated. Leave a dislike. I can see them. You can't. But if you do, leave a comment so I can improve for later. And aside from that, I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.